In this week's video, I'm going to show you how to paint this gorgeous kingfisher with watercolour with easy to follow instructions. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. All the materials that I'm going to be using, including the paints, the paper and the brushes, I will put in the description box below. And don't worry if you don't have the exact colours, use the nearest that you have. I always begin by a simple line drawing, and if you are worried about doing the drawing, there's no need, because I'll put an information card which shows you how I trace my drawings down. The line drawing and the photograph for this tutorial I will put in the Facebook group, details of which will be in the description box as usual. I begin by mixing burnt sienna to a really watery consistency with 2 puddles here and apply it to the belly of the bird. Using a damp brush, I then blend it into the existing wash just to make sure that the edges are nice and soft. And just smudge in the existing wash into the paper with a damp brush like this to give a really soft edge. Using a flat synthetic brush, I'm just lifting out a little bit of the paint to create some texture on the belly of the bird. This is really easy to do. And now adding some of the same colour around the eye. Paying careful attention to my reference photograph. Adding the same colour to the feet of the bird, or are they claws? Using a really watery mix of sepia, I'm adding this to the beak with a little bit of a gap in between the colour application just to give the enhanced highlight, as you can see. I'm using the same mix around the eye, once again just working around that little white highlight. And the same mix goes where the darker colours are within the body of the bird. It's really important that the paint application is watery at this stage, because we are just forming a template on which we will build later. This makes the darker colours easier to apply. I'm using a really small brush for this, but it doesn't matter, use whichever brush that you have. I'm applying some water to the head of the bird and just dropping in the same dark brown colour. It's almost black, this tone, so don't worry if you don't have sepia. You could easily use any darker black or brown shade that you have here. Now I'm using a number 6 size brush just to do a simple plain water glaze over the entire bird. This helps merge the colours together. Using peacock green, I decided to add this colour to the mix, along with peacock blue, as you can see on the top of the palette here. And I'm going to dip in and out of these 2 colours when I apply it to the bird. I felt that peacock blue was a little bit too bluey on its own, so I added the green. Like I said, if you don't have these 2 colours, you could use something like any turquoisey colour and add some yellow. Here you can see me adding some of the little dots of blue on the top of the bird in a sort of stippling motion. This gives the illusion of feathers, and we will build on it much later with a darker tone. This just means that we know where we're going with the colour. I'm dipping in between the peacock blue and the peacock green, and it doesn't really matter where you apply them. As long as there's a difference in colour, it just gives the illusion of it being more natural. If we were to use just one colour, it would look quite flat, hence the two tones. And the same for the tail feathers. Now that the paint has dried, I'm just using the same sepia mix, going over the existing colour and also working around the area on the beak. Still working around the highlights. It's really important that the highlights are retained because it makes it look really, really natural. And it also gives the bird some depth and some form. I've added a tiny bit of French ultramarine to the sepia, as you can see. Paying close attention to my reference photograph, and once again dipping between the peacock blue and the peacock green colours, working around the eye like this. I'm applying a tiny bit of the sepia to the peacock green and using it on the feather, as you can see here. Mixing a little bit of sepia as I go through. I'm actually using a very small brush to do this, but you could use a larger one, it depends. I just like the detail that it gives and it helps me have full control. Here you can see me adding some of the peacock green, and now that everything is dry, I go back to my palette and mix sepia to a slightly thicker consistency and add a bit of French ultramarine. This takes away the browniness of it and gives it almost a really dark blackish shade, and as you can see, I'm applying it to the eye as shown. Once again, I'm using a really small brush to do this, working around that highlight. Once I've applied the paint, I'm just using a damp brush to blend the colours into the eye to give it a really soft outline and a soft blur. But really, once again, maintaining that little highlight in the centre. And working around the beak. The base colour of the beak is now acting as the highlight, because we don't want the highlight to be absolutely white. And just flipping my attention back to the body of the bird. Blending the colours as I go with a damp brush. At this point you can see that all the colours are in place and we can really start to build them up. I'm using burnt sienna here, in a slightly thicker consistency to the initial wash. Painting these vibrant birds in watercolour is an absolute joy. It takes a little bit of practice, but it really is worth it. And you can see me here just using a sort of feathery-like motion to create the feathers. It's not a flat colour. Once again, using the burnt sienna mix to add the darker tones. I'm always looking at the reference photograph, which is why you can see me changing the colours as I go through. And once again, using my number 6 to just add a water glaze to blend those colours together. Once the colour is absolutely dry, I've focused my attention on the branch and I mix a really watery mix of Piemonte Genuine. You could use any light brown for this and just leaving little gaps in between just to give the illusion of texture on the bark of the tree. Once this is dry, once again, I'm turning my attention to the bird and just lifting out some of the colour on the belly of the bird. And now we're going back to the sepia mix and adding it onto the wing of the bird, as you can see, leaving little gaps as I go. By the way, if you're enjoying this type of painting and you like painting botanicals, you may want to head over to my Patreon school where I do in-depth tutorials of all things flowers. Once again, the link is in the description box below. Oh, and don't forget to like this video if you are enjoying it. It helps YouTube know that you're enjoying my content and I can continue to give you all things free. Going back to the bird, I'm now mixing the peacock blue and applying it here along with a little bit of peacock green, once again for texture, going over the existing wash that we had in place, leaving little gaps here and there to make it look natural and organic. And the same goes for the tail feathers. The application method that I'm using for this is obviously wet on dry. I find that it gives me more control of the paint. Do you have a favourite method of painting? If so, let me know in the comments below. Once again, building up those layers using the mixes on my palette. And of course blending in with my number 6 brush. And just continuing the process. I am using a limited palette for this tutorial and I realise that you may not have the colours that I'm using. These are actually quite old paints that I wanted to use up, but like I said, just use the nearest that you have. There's no hard and fast rules for this. If you've got a turquoise colour, use that, and so on and so forth. Don't have to use exactly the same colours. Painting should be fun, so just paint and relax. I'm adding a little bit of transparent orange to the burnt sienna just to give it a little bit more vibrancy here and there. and a little bit of the sepia mix to add a few ruffled feathers on the bird, as you can see, just to give it a bit of texture. I did feel that the bird was looking a little bit flat, so I introduced another colour, which is yellow ochre, and you can see me applying it as shown. When everything's dry, I mix Horizon Blue. This is a really unusual colour because it has a kind of opacity to it, and I found that it was really ideal for adding some of the finer detail. If you don't have this colour, you could use something like any turquoise blue and mix it with a little bit of a white paint just to give it a little bit more opacity. But again, if you don't have it, don't worry, just paint the colours that you have. You can see by applying this colour, it's quite a dense colour, and it works really well for this bird. It's also a really vibrant, bright colour. This colour is made by Shinhan. Using my finer brush, I'm just adding a few dots of it around the main feather, as you can see here. And just continuing the process, making sure that I blend it into the existing washes with a damp brush. This little bird is really taking shape now. When everything's dry, I'm going back to the existing washes and just applying them and making them darker and stronger. I added a little bit of French ultramarine to the peacock blue for the dark colour on the tail feathers, as you can see here. Once again, blending it with a damp brush. I'm using a dark sepia mix here to outline the areas that I've already painted, just to give them a bit of sharpness. Now that everything's dry, I've cleaned down my palette and I've mixed 3 colours here on my palette, as you can see. They are sepia, yellow ochre, and a mixture of burnt sienna and transparent orange. And I'm just using a stipple in motion on the top of the bird's head to add some texture with the sepia mix. There's also a little bit of French ultramarine mixed in with this. This gives the illusion of the feathers on the bird's head, and I'm also using the tip of the brush to outline them on the outside so that it hasn't got a flat edge. And continuing this process. The other two mixes on my palette I'm using to go over the existing washes that I've already applied onto the bird. This makes it super easy to do, so you know guesswork here because you already know where you're going with the colours. Just adding a little bit of texture here and there. I'm mixing French ultramarine and applying it to the area as you can see here. This gives a little bit of tonal contrast. And a little bit of the sepia mix to the back of the bird. And just continuing this process, blending the colours together. I'm using the colours on my palette to enhance the colours one more time. Here you can see me with the burnt sienna and transparent orange mix, just to give it a little bit more vibrancy. And the sepia mix to apply a little bit of shadow underneath the claws. And just adding some finer detail to the bark of the tree. Dipping in and out of the tree and then the bird, just adding some texture and some detail. I'm just using a fine brush to outline some of the feathers to give it a little bit more definition where I felt it was needed.